Joining the conversation, we have Pulitzer Prize-winning author and presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, co-founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader, White House correspondent for Politico, and co-author of The Playbook. Eugene Daniels is with us. Great group this hour, along with me and Jonathan. Doris, what will you be looking for this week leading up to the debate and during the debate? Because you see the downplaying the Trump side is doing. All of a sudden, Joe Biden's such a strong guy who could really eat him for lunch.
Surely it's just a battle of expectations, and that really matters in terms of what you think the person is going to do. You know, for example, in the 1960s, the first ever debate, the expectations were that JFK was too young, too inexperienced. Can you imagine that? We worried about him being too young. He was only going to be 43 when he was elected, the youngest president in history. So all you needed him to do was to stand up side by side to Nixon so that he looked like he had stature. So here, I guess the question is, you've got two older people. Which one will have more vitality? Which one will have more energy? Which one will be able to connect with people more? Which one will be able to present programs that those people will care about? It's really the same thing that always is. Whatever they say about the expectations, it's going to be what we think when we watch them. How do we feel, and how do we come away after the debate is over?
All right, Hillary Clinton has a new guest essay in the New York Times, and it's entitled, "I've Debated Trump and Biden, and here's what I'm watching for." She writes in part this: "It is a waste of time to try and refute Mr. Trump's arguments like in a normal debate. It's nearly impossible to identify what his arguments even are. He starts with nonsense and then digresses into blather. This has only gotten worse in the years since we debated. Yet expectations for him are so low that if he doesn't literally light himself on fire Thursday evening, some will say he was downright presidential. These ploys will fall flat if President Biden is as direct and forceful as he was when engaging Republican hecklers at the State of the Union address in March." Secretary Clinton then advises viewers not to get hung up on the theatrics. Instead, she says to, quote, "Pay attention to how the candidates talk about people, not just policies. Try to see through the bluster and focus on the fundamentals at stake. And when you see these two men side by side, think about the real choice in this election. It's between chaos and competence." And Jonathan Lemire, I would add also women's rights at stake. Already 50 years of rights decimated, and our health care not existent in some states when women need it in life-saving situations. I mean, the contrast is stark, and yet Donald Trump has inured Americans, even some members of the media, definitely members of Congress, to his behavior. And it will be like Biden steps sideways one way, the wrong direction, and it's front page headlines, Wall Street Journal front page report on Joe Biden's age and fitness, while Donald Trump acts crazy literally every day, says something inappropriate, says something untrue, literally every day, and it's not even covered. It's protected on some networks, by the way.
First, to your point, abortion rights, abortion health care rights are part of every conversation about this election and will loom large both tomorrow night, but also, of course, on Election Day in November. But to Secretary Clinton's point there about ignoring the theatrics, that's difficult to do since Donald Trump is pretty much all theatrics. But the Biden campaign's goal is indeed to really provoke him on a few key issues. Abortion rights, you mentioned, also January 6th, democracy, guns, the list goes on. Expect an early question about the 2020 election results. Put Trump on the spot in front of the national audience about who won 4 years ago. Make him, if he chooses to do so again, bluster and lie. And the idea is to turn off those voters, those swing voters who are going to decide this thing. But more than that, as a senior aide put it to me the other day, just remind Americans, hey, this is who Donald Trump is, and like it or not, this is your choice. Trump, Biden. We know there's a lot of polling out there, Americans unhappy with this race, but this is what it's going to be. And the Biden camp suggests that even if there are voters out there who don't really like either man, they'll recognize, Lauren, that Donald Trump is simply an unacceptable option. So the stakes here are really high. And Biden aides have been telling me consistently that they think they have they acknowledge there are real risks here for President Biden, but also real opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, look, the expectations in some ways are so low of the president. You know, he's constantly underestimated, and we saw that in the State of the Union, this sort of surprise from people that, yes, he's competent and energetic and can show up and talk about the issues in ways that connect, and he can call out Republicans when they heckle him in the middle of the chamber. The Republicans then turn this around to be, you know, this ridiculous conspiracy theory that somehow he was on drugs and that was the only way he could do that. But I think when it comes to, like, some of the core policy issues, I think there's no question. They're both going to be challenged on this. And, you know, you can't not ask Trump, you know, do you still believe in criminalizing women for, you know, for getting abortions? Are you proud? Are you still proud of what what Dobbs has wrought when millions of women are now denied health care? Do you think, one question I hope they'll ask, and I suspect Deanna Bash may ask something like this, which is, should women be turned away from hospitals when they're facing life-threatening consequences of, complications from pregnancy? Like, they're very simple questions to ask but Trump that paint a very clear picture about where he is. And I think Americans have sort of forgotten in some ways. We've tuned him out.
So, Eugene, Lauren just effectively laid out how President Biden is going to go on the attack. Let's get you to weigh in on how President Biden might have to play some defense here on a few issues. We know we certainly, Republicans are going to make an issue of his age, okay. But there's also immigration. There's inflation, which polls show Americans still deeply concerned about, even as it's starting to trend in the right direction. Talk to us about the playbook here as to how the president and his team in Wilmington are going to defend what he's done so far.
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen actually over the last couple of months is kind of what they plan to pull out of the toolbox, especially on immigration, right? You have the president saying for months that Republicans didn't pass this bill because of Donald Trump, this bipartisan bill that came out of the Senate. And so he had to act, right? And so he did some restrictions at the border, but then he also loosened up some things for family members of immigrants. And so these are the kinds of things he's going to come out with. He's going to talk about his ability to do both and creating an immigration process the best that he can, from the executive action, in keeping things tight, but also being humane. And that is at the core of how they're operating. You know, and when it comes to inflation and the economy, what aides and allies of the president have been saying that he needs to do and what he probably will do on stage is admit to people that we know we have more work to do. We've done some things. Inflation is down. Things are better, right? They often talk about having the most resilient economy in the world, but Americans don't care about that, right? They don't care how it compares to other countries. They feel differently here. And he has to talk about that. And I think that is something that Joe Biden is actually pretty good at, right? We have to be honest, like, he's better at saying to people, like, I feel your pain. But he has to do that on stage in a way where you have Donald Trump yelling at him at the same time. And that's going to be pretty difficult.
Well, I don't know if he'll be yelling at him because they're going to cut mics. Go ahead, Doris.
I think the thing that may show up is that Biden has prepared much more for this debate than we know that former President Trump has. I mean, John Kennedy prepared for days and days. He knew every single question that might come up. They had 5x8 cards that would tell him what the potential answer was. They had a Nixopedia that said whatever Nixon's statements were and misstatements, he knew how to counter them. My husband was one of the 3 people preparing him. And I remember the morning of the debate, my husband said he was so anxious, but he came into John Kennedy's bedroom. He had his breakfast tray on his table, and he wasn't scared at all because he knew he had been prepared. He had worked much harder than Nixon, who was in seclusion the day of the debate. Somehow he thought he was the better debater, that he was going to win this thing easily, that John Kennedy spoke above people. And by the time the debate was ended, Kennedy had understood the question so well that my husband on the plane on the way back at the Carolines said, "We've won it. The debate, it's over. The whole election is won." John Kennedy just simply smiled and said, "There's a long way to go, just as there is now." Just as John Kennedy was eating tomato soup and beer to relax, he said, let's figure out what we did wrong, what we did right, and where we go forward. So there was a sense, really, I think, that preparation makes a difference and that he was combined with knowledge, with facts, how nice it was that he had a lot of facts about things that true and turned out to be true. So I think we're going to see that Biden was far better prepared, and that really does make a difference in the end. That's what I'm expecting to see.
I'll counter that with one wild card here, and that is that Donald Trump likes to shoot from the hip. He had his TV show for years. He knows how to just grab something in his brain and run with it, even if it kind of doesn't really apply to the subject at hand. He can weave it really well, and in a way that's so distracting that it can throw whoever he's talking to, whether it be an actor or an actress, a reality person on The Apprentice, or at a game show or at a pageant or whatever. He's been on stage, he's been under the lights, he's been in front of the camera for a great part of his life, and he likes it. And I think that can be dangerous. Now, in Gabe's report, we heard from former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, and we want to play more of that. Here is his full endorsement of President Joe Biden for re-election.
I'm Adam Kinzinger, and I'm a proud conservative. I always have been. As a proud conservative, I've always put democracy and our Constitution above all else. And it's because of my unwavering support for democracy that today, as a proud conservative, I'm endorsing Joe Biden for re-election. My entire life has been guided by the conviction that America is a beacon of freedom, liberty, and democracy. So while I certainly don't agree with President Biden on everything, and I never thought I'd be endorsing a Democrat for president, I know that he will always protect the very thing that makes America the best country in the world: our democracy. Donald Trump poses a direct threat to every fundamental American value. He doesn't care about our country. He doesn't care about you. He only cares about himself. And he'll hurt anyone or anything in pursuit of power. We saw that when he tried to overturn an election that he knew he lost in 2020. He attacked the foundation of this nation, encouraging a violent mob of his supporters to march on the Capitol to prevent the peaceful transition of power. Now he's become even more dangerous. He's called for termination of the Constitution. He wants to be a dictator on day one. He actually said that. And he's continuing to stoke the flames of political violence. There's too much at stake to sit on the sidelines. So to every American of every political party and those of none, I say now is not the time to watch quietly as Donald Trump threatens the future of America. Now's the time to unite behind Joe Biden and show Donald Trump off the stage once and for all.
So, Doris, do you think this helps, this along with all the disinformation networks not running the truth on their actual content, on their news shows? What do ads like this do? I mean, I think it could help a little bit, but there's so much noise out there.
I actually do think it will help a little bit, reminding people of January 6th, reminding people of democracy. And the timing of this ad, I think, is very important, just as it may well be that President Trump, former President Trump, will figure out the vice presidential choice if he wants to take attention away from the debate. This timing is really good. You know, I think the important thing is there's not going to be an audience in this debate, so that Trump's capacity to get that audience going, that gives him the contagion back, that gives him the energy back, that rule will help. I think the fact that he can't interrupt will mean that the distractions that he usually uses, as you rightly say, he's been using for years, can't be used. In a certain way, they've gone back to what the rules were in 1960. There was no audience. They spoke to the cameras. And it may be that that debate that took place in 2020 made America feel that somehow it was the worst debate in history, that America had lost. So these rules changes have allowed us to go back to what the normal debates would have been about. And I think in a normal debate, he'll have much more trouble. Although you're right, that the television studios may not carry those things. They may just carry parts of it. But people are going to see the whole thing. It'll be the most extraordinary debate, I think, since 1960. And we just have to know what's going to happen soon. I wish I were the historian looking back at it right now and I could tell you what it was all going to be about, and the anxiety that the country is feeling. You know, the candidates are usually so anxious. Now the whole country is anxious. It's a different situation than it was when they would wake up in the morning and they were wondering, what's going to happen tonight? We're all wondering the same thing about what's going to happen Thursday night.
Absolutely. Pulitzer Prize-winning author and presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, thank you so much. And her latest book, entitled An Unfinished Love Story, A Personal History of the 1960s, is on sale now. You've got to get it. It's amazing. So, Lauren Leader, I want to jump now to New York politics, which you know well. Talk a little bit about what happened last night. Jamal Bowman's loss, John Avlon's win.
I've been dying to talk about this, so I'm really glad to have the opportunity. So as you know, I served in public office in Westchester County. George Latimer was one of the very first people that I met when I started doing New York politics. Why? Because George Latimer has spent decades doing nothing but the most sort of grassroots shoe leather politics you can imagine. And it's really important to remember, especially today, as so many people are blaming the outside money from AIPAC, and a lot of progressives on Twitter this morning have been railing against, the outside interests, et cetera. It's dead wrong. The reality is that George wound up getting endorsed by local communities all over Westchester. Why? Because he's shown up for those communities year after year, day after day. This is a guy who works 7 days a week, never misses a meeting, never misses a parade, is at everything and knows the district inside and out. And Jamal Bowman, by contrast, I think is like a playbook in what not to do as a new congressman, right? He was very detached from the district. He didn't come to events. He voted against the infrastructure bill, which was fundamental to Westchester. There were a lot of big infrastructure projects that needed to be funded. He didn't know people. And, I'll just say on a personal level, like, he came to see me when I was elected, and instead of asking what he could do to serve me and serve my community, wanted me to just raise money for him and told me that he could win any race in New York, and just sort of, it was all bluster. And I think, you can blame AIPAC if you want. Obviously, there was a lot of outside money, but at the end of the day, this was a real grassroots campaign. George knocked on literally every Democratic door in Westchester. So I really want to put down the nonsense that somehow this election was bought. It was not. George did the work.
Yeah, Bowman tried to nationalize the race and obviously didn't work here.